Today on Investigate TV Plus, a volunteer program whose mission is to foster friendship and world peace faces an uncertain future. I'm Lee Zurich.
And I'm Tisha Powell. We take an in-depth look at the Peace Corps, the challenges of continuing its legacy, and a solution to attract the next generation of recruits. Plus, protecting sacred grounds.
If I tell you that rock is sacred, it's sacred. And, I shouldn't have to explain why.
Indigenous people fight to preserve places important to their identities, traditions, and histories.
We wanted to make policy that could reflect what those teachings were handed down, how they're handed down, and then protect it.
We examine new federal guidelines that some say will help right the wrongs of the past.
Then,
he's 88 and a half years old. And a half, yeah. Oh yeah, the half counts.
But there's nothing half about her dad. A Vermont man is inspired to put a new twist on his family's sweet tradition.
In-depth stories that inform and inspire. You're watching Investigate TV Plus. Former President Bill Clinton once said volunteerism is an act of heroism on a grand scale. But recently it's been harder for churches, government agencies, and nonprofits to find people willing to give of their time and talents.
Volunteerism has been on the decline for years, and the pandemic only made the problem worse. According to AmeriCorps.gov, formal volunteering dropped 7% from 2019 to 21, the largest reduction since data collection began in 2002. Even with a drop in volunteers in 2022, more than 64% of nonprofits reported an increase in demand for their services.
As that need grows, organizations like the Peace Corps are ramping up the search for volunteers.
Founded by President John F. Kennedy as a way to improve relations with developing countries, the Peace Corps is a government-run volunteer agency that works to promote peace, friendship, and understanding between cultures around the world. After a 2-year pandemic-driven hiatus, the International Service Organization has fallen from 7,000 volunteers to a little more than 2,800.
Now, more than 60 years after its founding, the Peace Corps is calling for renewed support. Kaya Coben may be in New Orleans now, but after spending time overseas, the Louisiana native still considers the Eastern European country of Moldova her second home.
So when I came home to the United States, I struggled. I'm homesick for Moldova, but I'm homesick for New Orleans. I don't know where I'm from, what's my identity.
She spent 3 years there as a Peace Corps volunteer, but said she'll never forget that first day.
That day was wild because I went to a village where no one spoke English. My Romanian was beginner level at best.
But 6 months later, she was speaking fluent Romanian, was immersed in Moldovan culture, and had built a genuine level of trust in her village.
And what were you assigned to do? What was your job?
So my job was to work with the local mayor's office, and what you're doing is trying to figure out what they need and then how I can support what they need or what wishes and things they want to learn.
Kaya, who was 30 and single at the time, helped adults write grants and taught English to Moldovan youth.
And that's a core value of Peace Corps, is it's not just what you do, but it's building the friendship on a very much a grassroots level.
Since its inception, more than 240,000 Peace Corps volunteers have served in 144 countries, working alongside local communities to address critical needs in the fields of education, environment, health, agriculture, and infrastructure. But today, the Peace Corps is facing new global challenges, and its mission is more vital than ever.
It is strenuous, it does take some grit and resilience, but it's so rewarding.
David White Jr. is the Peace Corps' deputy director.
And we recognize there's so much demand for Peace Corps volunteers. We can't keep up with that demand. It would require greater government funding, of course, even more interest among this generation and other generations.
Traditionally, the Peace Corps often pulled from young adults in their 20s fresh from the college ranks, which makes Gen Z a primary target for today's recruiters, a target that's been hard to reach.
I think with Generation Z, they care about the issues. They care very deeply about the issues, but they don't necessarily have the same confidence in institutions that generations before have had. And so their way of attacking these really tough and intractable problems is different. right? A lot of online organizing, using their voice over the internet to speak up.
White and others are focused on moving Gen Z from online activism to actual boots on the ground.
But what we hope to show them is that there's other ways too. An opportunity to actually go out into the world, to really get outside of your comfort zone like we talked about and make a difference in person.
The Peace Corps hopes that a change in recruiting strategy and offering more flexible ways to serve will boost the number of volunteers across all generations, from college grads to retirees. Bottom line is, volunteers can come from any background.
If they show up with their underwear and a toothbrush, we take care of the rest.
And when they finish their time of service, local communities can benefit. The spirit of giving back rarely fades for returned Peace Corps volunteers, or RPCVs as they're called. Kaya is now the chair of the Junior League of New Orleans Diaper Bank, helping to support local families in need. League President Tara Waldron says volunteers like Kaya are invaluable.
It is, simply put, a leg up, right? When they come in, first of all, almost always, even if they're not officially a leader, they tend to lead their group. And they show others a good example of why it's important and what that impact can be. And I think that when you come in already as a leader, you empower other women to start to lead as well.
Did your Peace Corps service change you in any way? Did you come back a slightly different person, maybe with a different perspective about some things?
I think so, for sure. I'm more open to figuring out a situation or learning different viewpoints, whereas maybe I wouldn't have been before.
A new lens from which to see the world, and no regrets.
I've never met a Peace Corps volunteer who's ever said, I regret my service, I regret my time abroad, there's never a regret.
That's what I want people to take away. You show up to Peace Corps with a willingness to serve, we're going to take care of the rest.
Couples married or unmarried of all sexual orientations and gender identities can serve together. If, for whatever reason, a volunteer is not adjusting well during their service, they can return home.
And if you're interested in volunteering for the Peace Corps, you can serve in the traditional 2-year program. It's actually 27 months of service in total. For someone who's established a career, there's a shorter service model called Peace Corps Response that ranges from 6 months to a year of service. This is for someone who has a college degree and at least 2 years of professional experience.
The Peace Corps provides a stipend for volunteers during their service and pays all travel expenses. When a volunteer completes their service, they also receive a readjustment allowance. Still to come, a mother struggled to understand her autistic son's needs.
I just couldn't figure out how to, help him completely.
So she turned to counseling to address her feelings.
It's just made the biggest difference.
We explore how parent training empowered her and helped her son.
But first, indigenous people have struggled for centuries to protect their sacred grounds.
It's a proud moment, right? There's a little bit of tears. It's a long time coming.
We take an in-depth look at new guidelines to preserve their history and what you can do now to help turn the page and protect these sites. Our in-depth coverage continues. You can get connected to Investigate TV Plus on all social media platforms.
For centuries, indigenous people have witnessed land they consider sacred desecrated by governments and private companies.
Yeah, for example, in 2020, federal contractors used explosives to raze a sacred Apache warrior burial site during construction of the U.S. border wall. A report released in September 2023 by the Government Accountability Office found construction of the wall caused irreparable damage to both cultural and natural resources in the area. Now a new federal policy statement could help with preservation efforts.
Investigative reporter Carice Jackman sits down with federal officials to discuss the impacts on the Native community, plus what you can do if you want to help protect these historic sites.
For Reno Keone Franklin, his culture, his heritage is his world.
I'm actually American Indian on my father's side, and my mom was Native Hawaiian.
To honor his ancestors, Franklin fights for the preservation of indigenous history and sacred ground throughout the U.S. Franklin says their knowledge of historic sites, passed down from generation to generation for thousands of years, gets no respect from federal, state, and local governments, or even private contractors.
Our knowledge as Native or Indigenous people is always discounted. You know, there's some really good archaeologists out there, really good federal employees. And there's also the other ones that just feel like, hey, no matter what, just because you're Indian, you got to prove it. You know, and if I tell you that rock is sacred, it's sacred. And, you know, I shouldn't have to explain why.
It's what spurred Franklin to get involved with the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation, an independent federal agency based in Washington, D.C., tasked with promoting the preservation of our nation's most diverse historic sites.
We wanted to make policy that could reflect what those teachings were handed down, how they're handed down, and then protect it.
And after 2 years of hard work and consulting with over 200 tribal people and Native Hawaiians, Franklin is finally a step closer to ensuring indigenous knowledge is respected nationwide. In March of 2024, the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation, or ACHP, in Washington, D.C., approved what they're calling a groundbreaking policy.
It's a proud moment, right? There's a little bit of tears. It's a long time coming to tell Indian people that, you know, your indigenous knowledge it stands on its own.
One community this policy will help tremendously is Lahaina in Hawaii. These new guidelines will help provide valuable information on indigenous knowledge to guide the rebuild of Lahaina. Sarah Bronin is the chair of the ACHP. She visited the devastation in Hawaii and says this policy is a game changer by righting the wrongs of the nation's past.
We know that for far too long, indigenous knowledge has not been part of our decision-making framework, and that's why it's really important for us to step up and to recognize that source of knowledge.
Bronin says the policy statement is broken up into 12 principles for federal, state, and local governments to follow before making any historic preservation decisions. Among them, understanding the knowledge of tribal, Native, Hawaiian, and Indigenous people, and the way they came to know the importance of their land. Also, not requiring them to provide documentation to justify their claims.
What we say in the policy statement is that indigenous knowledge is valid and self-supporting.
What tips would you provide consumers, homeowners, or just general people if they want to find out more?
Understanding if there are Native tribes in your area, understanding if there are Native Hawaiian organizations and communities that might be connected to your properties, other indigenous peoples as well. So I would say the first step is getting the local context.
Franklin says this is a monumental and major first step. He'll continue working to ensure that Native history and knowledge is preserved, no matter where in the country it is.
I was given some knowledge when I first came up, and it was, leave it better than where you found it. That's the message that I received, and that's the message that I push forward. There's a lot of work to be done, but it's a little bit less today because of this vote.
Just ahead, making maple syrup and memories.
I still feel pretty good.
You look pretty good, too, for an old guy.
Yeah.
How decades in the Vermont woods helped him chip out a career.
But first, some moms and dads may feel helpless when dealing with a child who has a mental health or behavioral issue.
I broke down and cried. I literally cried in the hallways of the school.
We take a look at how parent training could change the lives of both parent and child.
You can watch Investigate TV Plus anytime, streaming online. Get the app for Roku, Amazon Fire TV, and Apple TV. They're free to download. Watching a child struggle with their mental health can make a parent feel helpless.
Several studies have found issues like depression, anxiety, and ADHD in a child can lead to increased stress and feelings of guilt. It can even cause a parent to develop their own mental health concerns. So what's the best way to help the child and parent thrive?
One method backed by science is called parent training. Reporter Kara Sundlum met with an expert to learn the tools that could improve the parent-child relationship.
I broke down and cried. I mean, I literally cried in the hallways of the school because he was refusing to go to school so much.
Grace Grinnell is a mother of 4. When her 4th child came along, she soon realized all of her parenting tricks didn't seem to apply for her son Jack, a deeply feeling kid who has autism and struggles with anxiety.
And I just couldn't figure out how to, help him completely.
Whether you have a child on the spectrum with ADHD or just a kid who battles depression and anxiety, parent training can help. Dr. Alan Kasdan has helped thousands of parents like Grace Grinnell. He literally wrote the book on parent training for behavior change in kids. Actually, he's written dozens and wants to empower parents. Some of his most famous books are The Kasdan Method for Parenting the Defiant Child and The Everyday Parenting Toolkit, all backed by decades of scientific research done at the Yale Child Study Center, where he was the director.
This method has my name on it, but it's the research of many people on how to change human behavior. And so what we do is we apply this to child rearing. Parents want to change human behavior, but they use things that we know are not very effective. Reprimands, punishment, nagging. No, it doesn't. What we know from massive amounts of research is that the punishment momentarily suppresses behavior, but the behavior comes right back and at the same level.
In a nutshell, the Kasdan method relies on positive reinforcement in a very specific way. You can learn the Kasdan methods in free videos he's created. Kasdan no longer sees patients, but many other therapists are trained in parent counseling. Grace turned to psychotherapist Dan Weiner.
It doesn't look like what you would think, like
No.
a therapy office. Is that intentional?
Definitely. Yeah, we want it to be comfortable.
Here, parents relax on comfortable couches, and when kids are brought in, there are lots of games, and even Archie to add some life to the sessions here.
Part of it is just figuring out how are we supposed to approach them in a way that's going to be more effective. For some, a firm, authoritative hand is going to be really valuable. For others who are kind of rigid per se, or who are more anxious, that authoritative posture is just not going to be as effective. It's going to only exacerbate anxiety.
After coming to Dan, Grace feels empowered to be a better mom, and that's helped her son, Jack.
It's just made the biggest difference. I mean, when I look at my son today from the, where he was, I never would have thought he would be in the place he is. He is, just thriving.
To find a counselor to help with parent training, try checking with your insurance or school for a list of providers. Every state has at least one parent training and information center. You can go to parentcenterhub.org to find one near you.
Up next, the outdoors, his family, and tradition keep him strong.
I still feel pretty good.
We share the story of a man who discovered the sweet side of life.
You can watch Investigate TV Plus anytime streaming online. Get the app for Roku, Amazon Fire TV, and Apple TV. They're free to download.
A nearly 90-year-old Vermont man is the keeper of his family's traditions.
Roger Kennison started chopping down trees as part of the process of making maple syrup. And while Roger is no longer in the business of sap, he's still splitting wood.
Reporter Joe Carroll shares a story that will warm your heart.
Roger Kennison and his son Bill have a sweet spot for their land in a certain structure the family owns in Westfield.
Been here many, many, many years.
A weather-beaten relic from the past.
Years ago, the sugar places were not all side the road.
On a bumpy logging road surrounded by sugar maples.
So the horses would come up here?
Oh, yeah.
200 years, Roger figures.
The old times. The old times. Boiling the sap. And
At least a century making maple syrup with the Kennison clan, with memories flowing like sap on a warm spring day.
Because we've always burnt firewood at the sugar house. That's how we boil the sap.
My mother with all the donuts and all the food you could imagine.
Bill's kid sister Judy even made a sign when she was 12. Wood is good.
What do you do for fun? We're going to go cut some wood. We're going to make some syrup.
I haven't been here for quite a while now.
It's been long abandoned. A modern replacement is down the hill next to the road. But Roger says it's just not the same. However, Roger's days of working with trees are far from over.
He's 88 and a half years old.
You have to add that,
and a half, yeah. Oh yeah, the half counts.
Roger's job is keeping people warm.
They sure didn't think about it in July.
Splitting cords of wood to feed their stoves for the winter.
You don't need to advertise?
Never.
Word of mouth, in his word, stacks up to many local customers.
Roger used to split all of his wood here at the sugar operation, but he moved it down the road to his home for a very good reason.
And he moved it to the house to be close to my mom so that she could see him.
Dementia.
Roger and Janine met when they were teens.
Kind of cruel.
Sure is.
Yeah, that was in 2019.
Eventually you see her lose a memory, and then it's another little thing, and then there's another little thing. And
Their love, though, was crystal clear.
what you call way back then is love at first sight.
The couple were married for 65 years. She died 2 years ago, surrounded by family. And it's been a lifetime of working with wood.
That's me.
The baby.
You see there's a wood pile there too.
The 88-and-a-half-year-old has no intention of shutting down the splitter.
I still feel pretty good.
You look pretty good too, for an old guy.
Yeah.
And that motto, wood is good, still holds true.
No, I've had a good life.
I love adding the half to his age. I think about like young kids and older people both kind of every month counts, right?
It does. When you're in the middle, it doesn't really matter.
It doesn't.
At 88.
He's doing great
And
though,
a half.
right? And a half. And a half. Don't forget that. Yes. All right, that's it for us on Investigate TV Plus. I'm Lee Zurich.
And I'm Tisha Powell. Thanks for watching. On the next Investigate TV Plus, a family says a counterfeit airbag caused this young mother's death.
They aren't supposed to shoot shrapnel at your face and neck at hundreds of miles an hour in a millisecond and have lethal results.
Our investigation reveals why authorities are seeing more of these faulty parts and what you can do to protect yourself.